so the two most common finishes for the top of a waistband are, top of a skirt, are either a waistband or a facing. So what you would get, let's have a look, I'll do it in black so you can see it. Well, okay, so here's your skirt, whatever going on by way of darts or shaping. It could look, when it's finished, just like that. So it finishes with nothing, but it has a neat top edge. That would be a facing. Or it could finish so that, whatever your dart configuration, it had a finish of a band that ran around the top. The bands get a little bit more complex at the back. So if you've got your centre back, you can have a waistband that just comes together and a zip runs up through it. You can have the top of a waistband, or whatever your darts are there, top of a waistband at the back where you've got your zip here, and that you've got an overlap and a button. You can have it so that you've got your waistband at the top, like that, skirt coming down, that it runs straight up, but that you have an underlap that allows you to have a button. So, I know it should be quite a simple thing, but you've got these little complexities that get added in just to keep us on our toes. I'm going to start with doing the most simple one, which is the one that it would finish exactly the same measurement as the skirt top edge, and you would then have the zip run up through it. I'm going to chop that off actually, so we can have that as a little picture to remind me what it is that I'm doing. Making a waistband is very much like making a cuff, like we did for the sleeve, the shirt sleeve, classic shirt sleeve, but obviously the measurements are different. So let's talk about taking measurements from the block. So again, keep in mind that mine's not going to be particularly accurate because I've been using a big fat pen, but I'm going to take this tape measure on its side, and I'm going to measure around from the centre front to the dart, which is coming out at 7.1. I'm going to go to the other edge of the dart, put that on 7.1. I go across to the next dart, I'm coming out at 12.1. I move over to the side of the dart as if it were closed, and the measurement I come up with is a nice neat 18 centimetres. So across the front, half of the front is 18 centimetres. Right then, I'm going to go in on the back as well. I'm going to get us another light, see if that make, ooh, is that better, worse? Not sure. Okay. Got my front measurement. So what I've measured is along here. Let me do it in black so you can see. I've measured along there and I've stopped. I've measured along there and I've measured along there. We don't need the measurement of the darts because those will be sewn up. They'll disappear basically. Okay, so I'm going along the curve. I get to there, 9.6, about 18. Beautiful. So I've come out at 18 centimetres front and back. I'm liking that. I like a bit of symmetry. So that was what I measured, and that's what I measured. So for the front it was that, plus that, plus that, and on the back it's that, plus that. Wouldn't matter what your dart arrangements are, you just measure the waist without the dart in it. So if, for instance, you drop to the waist because you don't want it to come right the way up, those are the measurements that you would take. Although most likely, if you're going to drop it, you'd have a facing. Okay, let's take those measurements and do what we need to do with them. So we're going to start off with a straight line. And I'm going to mark a position on there at right angles that will run up through, and that is going to be my centre front, and this will also be my centre front. So I know that from my centre front to my side seam, because I'm assuming that this is having its zip at the back, which actually isn't necessarily a given. You can have your zip and your side seam, but I'm sure you can work around those measurements. Okay, so I'm coming 18 on either side, and that is going to be where my side seam is, and a very useful position for a notch. So again, I'm going to give myself a line, a right angle to the first line that we created. Now, very nicely and symmetrically to the centre back is also 18 centimetres. So this is going to be my centre back. So right angle here, centre back, and we're going to do the same on the other side. So this pattern piece, it has one centre front, it has two side seams, and it has two centre backs. Because it wraps right the way round. So you now need to know what depth we want the waistband. There is a limit as to how deep you can go with the waistband before you have to start shaping it, and I think that's around 5-6 centimetres. So I'm going to do this one relatively narrow at 4 centimetres. Waistbands can be really narrow. It could be like 2 centimetres if you wanted. Like I say, they can go up to 5-6 centimetres without you having to worry about shaping them. So we're now coming on the other side of our first line that we plotted, because the waistband is going to fold in the middle. So we're going to have the front and the back of the waistband are all cut in one. So like I say, this should really be reminding you of when we made the cuff. So fold here, I'm just going to write that on. The grain on this could run with the centre front or the centre back. They're essentially parallel to each other. So it could either run like so, or it could run with the length. Either way, I'm not particularly faffed about that. So we're now going to add seam allowance on. So the seam allowance that gets added onto these long edges are directly related to whatever the seam allowance is on the waist of the skirt. So I'm assuming a centimetre, but if it was 1.5 centimetres, you'd be adding 1.5 centimetres here. If it was 0.5, you'd be adding 0.5. Don't forget, if you're using half scale, all these measurements I'm giving you would be halved. So having said that, I'm going to assume that on the centre back, on my full size skirt, I'm going to have a seam allowance of 1.5 centimetres or 2, because it's easier to set a zip in with that little bit extra. So that's my 1.5 on either end. And this would give me a finish where the zip would go up through the waistband. It's my favourite, but it's not the only one. So that would be that. Now, if you wanted an underlap like that, or an overlap for a button and a buttonhole, you have to extend, but only on one edge. So because it's symmetrical, it almost doesn't matter. You just need to know when you're sewing it up, which bit's which. So I would suggest an underlap or an overlap should be, let me do this in another colour, should be 3 centimetres, could be 4, but it shouldn't really be less than 3 centimetres. So this would be the finished edge. It would then have seam allowance on it, potentially just 1 centimetre. When you're notching this, you will need to give yourself a centre front notch, side seam notches, centre back notches. So the centre back notches are not that important when you're putting the zip in up through the waistband, but it becomes very important if you're having an underlap or an overlap for your button and buttonhole. So that's waistband.